So I can't think of a single thing about which I am wrong. I'll let that sink in for a second. I know I have been wrong about things. I know on an intellectual level that I will be wrong about things. And I even know, that I am now, currently, again on that intellectual level, wrong about, facts or figures, ideas and beliefs. Probably even some of the ones about which I am very confident. My wife, for instance, would probably be happy to let you know some things I'm wrong about. The frequency with which bed sheets should be changed. The proper toppings for a pizza. Which professional sports teams are worth caring about or supporting. We have very serious differences over these things. But when it comes to me here and now, I don't know anything that I'm wrong about, because if I knew I was wrong, I would change my opinion, right? And I would be right again. And all of us live in this eternal present in which we think, we try at least, to be right about things. And I think that's very interesting. This is not particularly my original thought. This actually came from a TED Talk I saw more than a decade ago. A TED Talk given by a woman named Catherine Schultz, who you may have heard of. If you're not familiar with TED Talks, they're these big idea lectures. You may have seen this sort of thing on YouTube or online. You may have been to one in person. They host these big gatherings. Schultz, the woman I spoke of a minute ago, has devoted a considerable part of her life to thinking about being wrong. And being right, too, presumably, since those are intertwined, of course. I don't think it's active anymore, but for a long time she had a blog and then created a book out of that called On Being Wrong. She opened her TED Talk a little bit in the same way I opened this sermon. I got that from her too today. She talks about how we all think that we're right in this moment. And when she said it, I just instantly identified with that. I thought, wow, I do feel like I'm right about everything at this moment. And moreover, and this may just be me, I don't think this is necessarily universal, I really don't want to be wrong. I have a very strong internal reaction to that. I saw something else that made me think of this business about right and wrong and certainty. It's just sort of getting started, but our political season is leading up to an election you may be aware of. Those of us in Maryland voted this past week in our primary. But more specifically, or more largely, the political discourse. I particularly was thinking about being wrong and right when I try not to, but occasionally catch one of these talk shows, which is just two people yelling at each other, basically, that the other is entirely wrong and they're entirely right. It's a little bit like the debate stage too, I suppose, which that's coming too soon for me. And the thing I find most interesting about it is how little doubt appears in all of these discussions. It does not pay to have any doubt in today's political scene, maybe in today's culture as a whole. To be less than certain is a dangerous thing. And allied with that, being right seems to be so important. Now, Schultz has a really good theory about why many of us are so concerned with being right all the time. Now, we like to be right. That's not hard to figure out. But more to the point, she says that we don't like how it feels to be wrong. So I have a question. I'll take a couple answers quick. What does it feel like emotionally to be wrong? Anyone? Has anyone ever been wrong here? No? Yes. Embarrassing. Great. Anything else? Shame, frustrating. Exactly. We could go on, but that's sort of the realm I was going for, so thank you. Those are great answers. but they're the answers to a different question, which is, what does it feel like to realize you're wrong? Because just being wrong doesn't feel like anything. It feels like being right. You don't know that you're wrong. She gave this most beautiful analogy. Again, I'm just stealing stuff left and right from her today, but this TED Talk is so good. You should watch it. I know I'm going to add to it, though. Don't worry. She says it's like being the coyote in the Coyote and Roadrunner videos, cartoons, I mean. Specifically that moment when the coyote runs out off a cliff and the Roadrunner has taken a quick turn, and the coyote is there in midair for a moment. She says that being wrong before you realize you're wrong is just like being that coyote 1,000 feet up in the air and not yet realizing it. You're already wrong, you're already in trouble, but you don't yet realize it. And as I said a minute ago, the interesting thing about being wrong is that it feels just like being right. So I thought about this in connection because our monthly theme, we use these themes from an organization called Soul Matters for our worship. I don't always use them super heavily, so this is the first time this month I'm sort of talking about the theme. But the theme is pluralism. I spoke a little bit about it in the Time for All Ages earlier. The idea that we are not a faith that requires you to believe a specific set of tenets. You can believe a lot of different things and be a Unitarian Universalist, and we do. As anyone who has ever spoken to one or more Unitarian Universalists realizes pretty quickly. I love that, and I'm going to talk specifically about one of the sources of our faith in a minute, Christianity, because I think it's really important in this discussion. But I want to go and talk about something that a friend of mine, the Reverend John Leedy, who's a Presbyterian pastor, told me a number of years ago. He said the Presbyterians have an idea that they call mutual forbearance, which is a really fancy term, I guess, but the idea is that there are certain things about which Presbyterians have decided they agree, and there are a whole lot of things about which that they may or may not agree with one another. In the spirit of having some sort of reasonable relationship with one another and being able to get anything done ever, they talk about the things they disagree about in the spirit of mutual forbearance. And he said the easiest way to think about mutual forbearance is that you disagree with someone, but you need to remember that you might be the wrong one. And I think about that frequently in the context of this. I might be the wrong one. I don't think I am. I don't want to be, but I might be. Okay, so one of the sources of my faith, particularly in my spiritual life, is the Bible. Not every word of it, to be clear, but I find a great deal of inspiration and truth in it. And there's one verse that keeps popping in my head of late. I think it has something to do with what I want to talk about today. Excuse me. It's a very famous one. You've probably heard of it. It's Micah 6:8, which goes, "And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." Now, I love that. I know people who have it tattooed on themselves. It's a very, very famous line from Scripture. And I noted in the context of today's sermon that there's something missing from that, isn't there? It doesn't ever say that I have to be right all the time. And I just wonder, can that possibly be right? It just says act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. I don't need to be right all the time, which is a disturbing thing for someone like me who wants to be right all the time. And in fact, if anything, the last part of that phrase seems to be the opposite of being right. Being humble means acknowledging that you probably are wrong, at least some of the time, that none of us are right all the time, that we will make mistakes, that we should be aware of that. In short, I think we're called to realize that we will be wrong. There's another portion from the Bible that I think speaks very directly to this. The story of the Syrophoenician woman. She's not given a name, which I think is unfortunate. So all we know is that she's Syrophoenician, which all you need to know that means is that she was not Hebrew. She was a different ethnic group from the one that the historic witness primarily talks about. I believe, and I'm ready to be wrong about this, this is the only time in the scripture that Jesus is proven wrong about something. And it's not one of the wise men of the faith. It's not one of his disciples who constantly tell him that he's wrong, and they're always wrong about that. It's not his mother, who my mother told me I was wrong plenty. The only person who tells Jesus he's wrong, and is correct about that at least, is a woman from a different ethnic group whose name we never learn. The Syrophoenicians are also known as the Canaanites, more popularly. Let me read some of that passage. A Canaanite woman came from that vicinity, crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. He replied, and this is my favorite phrase in the Bible in some ways because it does not paint Jesus in a very flattering light. He replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, it is, Lord. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." Then Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed in that moment. In other words, he called her a dog, literally, and she said, "No, you're wrong." And Jesus, to his credit, actually listened, changed his mind, which is something a lot of us, myself included, struggle with doing when we're wrong. I've now been a parent for more than 12 years, and this will make sense in just a second, I promise. Those of you who are parents already know what it's like to have someone tell you you're wrong all the time. I'll go out on a limb and say that few things can change your perspective more than having a child, whether they're your own bodily child or not. All of you who have spent time with children probably have experienced this. Because I thought I knew a little bit about babies. My wife and I had read some books. We had ideas about things we were going to do and things we were not going to do. And some of that came true, but most of it did not with my children. And I realized that the more important thing was not following all the supposed rules, not trying to do the things we had planned before my first was even born. More important than any of that was to love him, to listen to what he needs and wants as best you can figure that out, and it's tough, and know that we will make some mistakes. Which I think is another way of saying act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. All of this, I think, amounts to something important. It points, sorry. Speaking of children, I hear them screaming outside. All of this points us to something important, to a new way of being that's not about being right or being wrong, but about being loving and being in relationship. So not to be right, but instead to be just and merciful and humble and loving. And this is so easy to forget in our world, which is focused on right and wrong, on results and measurements, that our call is rather to be loving, caring presences. Such a simple thing, difficult thing too. We would rather hold our grudges and worry about who is right and who is wrong and cling to our rules and laws. But what this world needs is people who care more about each other and less about being right or wrong. May it be so.